When the first alarm was sounded by the bandit sentries, Jon was already inside the outer perimeter, Longclaw in hand. The memory of the White Walkers flickered in his mind. No, these were men, living men, but men who chose blood and banditry over honest surrender. The fighting was quick and brutal. Their hasty barricades fell in minutes. Jon's men, disciplined despite being a small force, systematically overran the camp. The Sellswords fought viciously, cornered wolves snapping with nothing to lose. One by one, they fell under the northern steel and the grim efficiency of men who had survived far worse. In the chaos, torches set tents ablaze, illuminating the dark battlefield with flickers of orange and red. Shouts and clashes of steel filled the air. Jon himself took down a large mercenary who lunged at him, the man's scarred face twisted with rage. Longclaw bit through the mercenary's boiled leather. Another came from his flank, forcing Jon to pivot and block the downward slash with the Valyrian steel blade. A swirl of breath left his lips in a tense exhale, the terror of battle an old companion. He moved with a warrior's grace, trained in the yard at Winterfell, honed beyond the wall, culminating in a steel-sharp reflex. Ser Davos, an unlikely presence amid the fray, saved one of the younger recruits from a blow that would have ended him. The old smuggler wrenched the boy aside just in time. As the flames raged in the background, bandits either surrendered or died. By dawn, the Sellswords were routed. A few tried to flee, but mounted outriders cut them off. Jon took the survivors as prisoners, with a promise to grant them a fair trial if they laid down arms and pledged never again to raise steel against the innocent. Some did, dropping their swords in the mud, trembling under the threat of immediate execution. Others balked, cursing King Aegon Targaryen and spitting on the ground. Those were bound more securely, awaiting judgment. Jon stood amid the wreckage, smoke curling around him as the sun's light crept over the horizon. His men regarded him with a blend of admiration and awe. Though he was king, he fought alongside them, never once standing back to watch from a safe distance. He returned to King's Landing with the prisoners, many of them battered, bruised, and deeply resentful. Tyrion had them locked in the dungeons to await trial. The small folk cheered the king's return, for word had spread quickly that he had personally led the effort to protect Crownland villages. The city had endured so many cruel reigns, from the short but brutal rule of Joffrey Baratheon to the fanatical violence of Cersei Lannister and the devastating rampage of Daenerys. Now they were beginning to see a different kind of monarch, one who bled with them, who fought for them. Even the rebellious corners of King's Landing, the cut-purses and thieves who normally cursed the crown, started to hold their tongues, uncertain if this new king was as easy to despise as the ones they'd known before. Weeks unfolded into a new pattern of life. Slowly, the city stirred. Merchants began returning to trade goods, albeit nervously. Fishermen from the Blackwater Rush and Dragonstone brought fresh catch to the markets. Tyrion oversaw the reconstruction of vital structures and pathways, employing a surprising amount of the city's populace in the effort, so that they earned coin and put it back into the local economy. Sansa arrived from Winterfell, as Jon had requested, her carriage accompanied by a guard of loyal northerners, each of them wearing the direwolf sigil with pride. Her presence in the capital was met with mixed curiosity. Some in King's Landing remembered the child Sansa had once been, betrothed to Joffrey. Now she was a woman grown, steeled by tribulations, revered as the Lady of Winterfell who had outmaneuvered Littlefinger and aided in the realm's survival. Jon welcomed her warmly, though behind closed doors, they spoke in hushed voices about the burdens placed on him. She offered counsel, praising his efforts but also cautioning that the political game was only beginning. "You may have proved yourself in battle, Jon, but there are lords and ladies who have yet to bend the knee with open hearts. They wait for a weakness to exploit." He knew the truth in her words. The memory of how quickly men could turn, as they had with Robb Stark, weighed heavily on him. He trusted Sansa's sharp instincts when it came to politics. She had learned from the best, or perhaps the worst, in the form of Cersei and Littlefinger. Now it was a skill that served the Starks well. Among other visitors, the new Prince of Dorne finally came to King's Landing, carrying his father's pride and the tradition of Dornish aloofness. Some said he was Oberyn Martell's distant cousin. Others that he was of a lesser branch elevated to the seat after tragedy wiped out the main line. Regardless, he arrived with a retinue of fierce guards and a posture that suggested resentment toward the throne. Yet he was polite enough to kneel before Jon. "Dorne has suffered much," he said, "and we will not spill more blood for the realm's petty conflicts. Tell me, your grace, why we should trust a Targaryen again." Jon, recalling how Daenerys had once championed a new era, replied carefully, "I cannot undo the past. I can only strive to do better than those who sat this throne before me. If you are willing, we can forge a future that respects Dorne's autonomy while preserving peace." The exchange was tentative, like two beasts circling each other, but it ended with an uneasy accord. The prince and his retinue left with a promise to consider deeper alliances. That same week, a more personal quandary reared its head again. Suitors or potential queens? While he was not forced to marry immediately, the topic buzzed in every corridor of the Red Keep. Tyrion insisted that the matter was urgent, if only to discourage the constant barrage of offers and insinuations from across the realm. Jon loathed the idea of making such a decision purely for political convenience. Yet he recognized the precariousness of his throne. "I'll consider it," he told Tyrion, after one dinner where 3 highborn women had vied for his attention with pointed questions about the North, the fighting style of the Unsullied, and even his favorite color. Tyrion had hidden a smirk behind his cup of wine throughout the ordeal. In private, Jon lay awake, moonlight spilling across the Spartan furnishings of his royal chambers. He thought of Daenerys. He thought of Ygritte. He thought of the vow he had once made when he took the Black, never to take a wife, father children, or hold lands. How much had changed since then, how many oaths broken out of necessity. He had no illusions that a marriage now would be anything but a strategic arrangement. The realm demanded heirs, some promise of stability that would outlast his lifetime. Yet it felt like another weight on his shoulders, a chain that might keep him pinned to the very seat of power he had never wanted. At times, he ventured into the city in secret, wearing a plain cloak, accompanied by a couple of trusted guards. He walked amongst the people, listened to their worries, heard them curse the cost of bread, saw them nurse injuries from the siege. Some recognized him, others took him for just another Northman. Either way, he gathered that while the capital was healing, it was far from whole. Rumors circulated of deeper unrest. Pockets of Targaryen loyalists who insisted Daenerys should have ruled, or that her dragon Drogon would return from wherever it fled. Whispers also suggested that Cersei Lannister had left behind hidden caches of wildfire, threatening new destruction if discovered by the wrong hands. The city was a tapestry of secrets, and he was only just beginning to unravel them. One late afternoon, as he passed by the charred remnants of the Great September, he felt a pang of sorrow for what had been lost. The faith of the Seven had been shaken by the explosive end of the September and the High Sparrows regime. Now, a scattering of septons and septas tried to rebuild a smaller place of worship. Jon paused to speak with one who recognized him at once. Dropping to her knees, he asked her to rise. She marveled that a king might deign to talk with her. In shaky tones, she spoke of the faithful's concerns. How the wars had made them question their beliefs, how lawlessness still threatened, how many had lost hope in the crown after the legacy of so many broken promises. Jon listened, offering what solace he could. He pledged support to help rebuild some semblance of the faith. "People need something to believe in," he said, though inwardly he wondered if faith in a higher power was enough to quell the fear and anger that lingered in every corner of the realm. Not all was dreary. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by royal decree from Daenerys herself, visited King's Landing to help forge new weapons for the reborn City Watch. He brought with him the vigor of youth and a pragmatic sense of skill. Working side by side with the blacksmiths, he hammered out swords and shields, each emblazoned with a small direwolf, a subtle nod to the new king's northern roots. Gendry and Jon had a quiet respect for one another, and though the Baratheon name once vied for the throne in Robert's rebellion, the young blacksmith bore no grudges. "The realm needs forging too," Gendry joked, arms shining with sweat. Like a new blade hammered until it's strong and true, Jon found comfort in the analogy, a reminder that forging anything, be it a sword, a city, or a kingdom, required patience, fire, and a will to endure the hammer blows of fate. Amid the city's slow revival, the Red Keep became a hive of commerce and negotiation. Envoys came from Bravos and Pentos, wishing to re-establish trade routes. The crown had debts, always debts. Jon discovered that the Iron Bank had begun discreet talks with Tyrion, gauging whether the new regime would honor the old regime's obligations. Tyrion, adept with coin, managed to negotiate a restructuring of sorts, hoping to buy time until the harvests could replenish the royal coffers. All the while, Sansa continued to advise on the internal dynamics of Westeros, cautioning Jon on how to maintain alliances, how to handle the Vale and the Reach, which were under renewed leadership after the wars. Jon nodded, remembering how he had always felt out of place in Winterfell's Great Hall when dealing with southern politics. Now, he navigated a far larger stage with infinitely higher stakes. An undercurrent of tension existed between the siblings. Sansa was fiercely protective of northern independence, remembering how her people had suffered. Yet she wanted to support Jon, seeing him as a better king than any other who had sat on that throne in their lifetime. She urged him to respect the North's desire for autonomy. Jon, in turn, recognized that if he granted the North full independence, other regions would demand the same, unraveling the Seven Kingdoms. Their arguments were hushed, never loud enough to reach the ears of lords and ladies in waiting, but the disagreements carved a subtle rift. In their quieter moments, they reconciled, each acknowledging the burden carried by the other. The bond of family remained, even if the crown's demands tested it. Throughout all this, Jon kept a vigilant watch for any sign of Drogon, Daenerys' last dragon. No one had seen the creature since it carried her body away from the ruins of the throne room. Some reported sightings in the Far East, others claimed it had nested in the jungles of Sithorios. A handful of zealots believed Drogon would return and burn the capital again in vengeance. Jon, for his part, carried a quiet hope that the dragon had found a peaceful resting place away from humanity's cruelty. At night, in the quiet gloom of his bedchamber, he sometimes dreamt of black wings blotting out the sun, the rush of wind and fire. When he woke, sweat beading his brow, he wondered if that was a form of penance, his own memories punishing him for what had happened. One morning, word arrived that Samwell Tarly had become the Grand Maester in Old Town, with the Citadel having recognized both his learning and his unorthodox experiences. The Raven invited Jon to send a messenger or come himself to discuss matters of realm-wide significance, including the preservation of knowledge about the Long Night and the creation of new lines of communication between the Maesters and the Crown. Jon felt a glimmer of warmth at the thought of Sam, the dearest friend he'd ever had. Perhaps once the city was more stable, he might travel to Old Town, if a king could ever afford such a trip. As the weeks turned to months, the capital's market stalls filled with produce from the Riverlands, the Reach, and beyond. Though not lavish, it was a marked improvement from the Ashen Famine that followed Daenerys' siege. The City Watch expanded, wearing newly minted armor that symbolized Jon's rule, a mixture of Targaryen black and Stark gray, with a subtle motif of a wolf entwined with a dragon. Walls were shored up, the gates repaired, whispers of rebellion quieted. Even the Iron Islands, for the moment, sent no further demands, likely waiting to see how the new king's rule would unfold. Still, the question loomed. Would this fragile peace last? Even as Jon held counsel and listened to daily matters of dispute, farmers complaining about tolls, merchants haggling over trade rights, he felt the storms gathering on the horizon. Some lords believed the Targaryen line was cursed, that madness would eventually grip him as it did his father and aunt. Others saw a chance to manipulate a king who was too honorable, too uncertain, to push back on their ambitions. And across the narrow sea, no one knew what new powers or players might arise, spurred by the vacuum of Westerosi conflict. Late one evening, Jon found himself alone on a high balcony of the Red Keep. The wind curled around him, carrying the faint tang of salt from Blackwater Bay. King's Landing stretched out below, lamplight flickering in window after window, a patchwork of humanity. Beyond, the distant hills merged with the darkness. He closed his eyes and took a moment to let the hush of night settle over him. He thought of the words his father had imparted to him in spirit. However he might interpret them, the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Jon had done that. He had killed the woman he loved for the sake of the realm. He had fought battles, lost friends, and now he shouldered a crown. What kind of king would he be? Could he be the king who truly united the realm, healing ancient wounds and forging a new path, as he had done with the wildlings so long ago? Or would the weight of tradition and politics crush him, turning him into another link in the chain of Westerosi rulers who rose and fell in blood and fire? He did not know. He only knew he would try, as best he could, to govern with honesty and compassion. He wished for peace, but he also understood the realm's love of war and conflict, how quickly a spark could ignite a blaze. Dawn found him seated in the small council chamber, gazing at the map of Westeros etched into the table. Tyrion, Ser Davos, Sansa, and others gathered around to plan the next steps. A hush fell as they awaited his word. He inhaled slowly, letting the question linger in his mind. If the throne was truly his, how would he use its power to make things right? For so long, the Iron Throne had been the object of everyone's ambition, the source of countless betrayals and wars. Now that it was his, a battered realm on the mend lay before him, uncertain and fragile. Clearing his throat, Jon began to speak. His voice was steady, if not loud. He spoke of forging new treaties, of ensuring the realm's harvests were protected from brigands, of stationing watchers along the coasts to guard against Ironborn raids, of investing in the knowledge of the Citadel to prepare for any future threats from beyond the known world. As he spoke, some of the lords exchanged looks of surprise. Where they expected grand declarations or a thirst for conquest, they saw only a man focused on practicalities, on ensuring that mothers did not starve and children had roofs over their heads. A king more concerned with the living than with the illusion of glory. And though the story of Westeros was far from over, though new dangers would doubtless arise, the council listened, and for a moment unity settled over the table. They had a king who cared, who wore the crown not for personal gain but for the sake of the kingdom itself. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, had taken the throne, and though the realm's wounds were deep, though old grudges and new challenges hovered at the edges of his vision, he refused to yield. If the North had taught him anything, it was that winter always passes, and with every passing winter, a spring follows, harsh though it might be. So he resolved to stand firm, with the memories of the dead etched upon his heart, carrying the burdens of the living on his shoulders. The Iron Throne was his, for better or worse, and he would shape its legacy with the quiet strength of a man who never craved power, yet was determined to wield it justly.